Hey guys, in this video, I want to talk through getting over some of the objections on the phone with a customer that a potential customer might throw your way as a detailer, like things like this is too expensive, or I don't think I need a detail that's, all that detailed, or I'm just looking for a quick cleanup and wash, right? These are things that a lot of customers say to us as detailers on the phone, and I just want to give you some tips and tricks that I've learned help over the years. So the truck you're seeing me detail is a maintenance client that has been on my maintenance list for a very long time now, and so as we watch this detail, I think it'll be helpful to walk through this business stuff. So the first thing I want to talk about is the pricing objection, because this is probably the most common and detailers really freak out over it. So the first thing I want to highlight here is that as a detailer, you and I have to actually expect that when a new lead calls us on the phone, pricing is probably going to be the first objection that they bring our way. Okay, that's rule number one, and literally just shifting your perspective from being shocked when that happens to just expecting it. Like, hey, this is probably going to happen. Like almost every person I talk to says this if they're a new lead, okay? That's number one. The second thing that I want to set up this conversation with in terms of getting over the objections, the context I want to give you is you and I need to remember every single person on planet Earth, okay? Let's just say every person in the United States, because that's where I am, right? I'm in the US. They want their car detailed. Okay, I've never met a person who would say no to a free detail. If I approached them and said, hey, I'm going to detail your car for no cost, they would all say yes. Okay, so we need to understand that if money was not an issue, they would all say yes. Okay, perfect. So that means we just need to deal with the root objection, which is the money, and potentially it goes even deeper than that. Okay, so what this often sounds like on the phone when a customer calls in is they say, hey, Luke, I'm just looking for a quick wash and wax, and I actually used to have a detailer who did this on kind of like a monthly basis for me, and I've got a Land Rover that I just like to take care of. What do you charge for that? The immediate problem detailers run into is the customer asks, what do you charge? And the detailer doesn't feel like they have enough context to give an answer to that question, okay? So the only details that I know from this, mock phone call conversation is that they have a Land Rover, they have a detailer who used to do it, on some sort of regular basis, and the person, by telling me that they just want a quick wash and wax, what they're really telling me is they're really unaware of like the details that went in to probably what they had with the other guy. They're probably unaware of the details that come in for what I'm going to do. And so they're just kind of oversimplifying it, okay? The reality though is that if I don't give my customer that I'm talking to here some sort of idea of a price, and I call this a pricing anchor, then I lose the sale before it ever starts, because detailers are afraid to give a price in a situation like this because they feel like they're pigeonholing themselves to one price and they'll never be able to move it from there. So they're like, well, I need more information from the customer. The problem is the customer doesn't want to give you more information until they get some sort of pricing anchor, in the same way that I don't want to hire my plumber until he says, yeah, Luke, for the job that you're, barely describing to me, it's probably going to be around $1,000. It's like, well, now I know how to move forward in the conversation, and it's actually a segue to move forward in the conversation. So what I hear when my plumber tells me that is not, oh, I'm going to pay $1,000 exactly. All it does is it anchors me to like some sort of pricing reality so that we can then get more into the weeds. So what I use to give customers a pricing anchor is the size of the car that they tell me they want detailed, okay? The reason for that is because it's a really easy piece of information to get from them, and they often offer it up without you even asking. So in this conversation, like I said, they said, hey, I drive a Land Rover. It's like, okay, great. The way I'm going to answer this question is very specific. So check this out. Listen to the words I'm using. Hey, Mike, thanks so much for calling. So generally speaking, if you're talking about getting the interior and exterior of a Land Rover detailed for that size vehicle, we charge a starting price of about $125. But I would love to ask you some more questions to get a little bit more details about what you're wanting and potentially what this other detailer did for you. Is that okay? What I just did is create a situation where not only does Mike have a pricing anchor where he's like, oh, okay, cool, $125, that works for me, okay? And by the way, we'll go down the road in just a second of if he doesn't have that reaction. But second of all, I am not leaning on him to lead the conversation. So the other thing I'm doing in addition to giving a pricing anchor is I'm giving this segue into a very clear other part of a conversation. What a lot of detailers will do is say something like, $125 is where we start for a car like that. And then there's just silence, right? And then there's all this weight put on the customer to try to like come back from that and sort of like guide the conversation in some way. And it doesn't work. They're calling you because they're trying to get you to answer a problem for them, okay? So the more weight or responsibility I put on them in the conversation, the less I'm going to be able to keep them engaged, okay? So what I did is I answered his question, okay? But I answered his question in a way that does not pigeonhole me to one price. It just gives me an anchor to move forward with. And then secondly, I gave a segue to naturally take a next step in the conversation. So most people, you have to understand, when you say something like, I'd like to ask you more questions, and you kind of word it like I just did, they don't say no. So it kind of pigeonholes them into staying in the conversation because you're not putting anything onto them, right? It's like you're putting them in a massage chair, okay? They just have to sit there, click a button, okay? Don't make them work for it. Now, the second thing, so we can put that on hold here. The second thing that might happen in a conversation like that, and maybe what you guys are more afraid of happening, and just to recap, what I hopefully just did is eliminate the fear that many of you might have in the question most customers ask immediately, which is, what do you charge? You should not be afraid of that question. It should be something you should expect, and it should be something that you actually can give an answer for. And the answer is not, well, I need more details from you before we can talk about that. It's like, no, we can talk about that right now. And I'm going to strategically use the fact that we're talking about that to move further down into the conversation. Let's pretend that Mike hears me say, we charge $125 as a starting price. And let's say he has this big reaction, and let's make it dramatic because that's what most people are afraid is going to happen, right? So Mike is like, whoa, $125? I would never pay that for a detail. I'm sorry, like we don't even need to talk about this anymore. Let's just say he like totally directly tries to shut me down. Here's what a response might sound like from me. Oh, hey, yeah, no, I totally understand, Mike. Absolutely. Can I have a little bit more context about the deal that you had with your previous detailer? I'd love to know what he did and what he charged. So I'm just taking a little snippet of the information he offered me in the beginning, and I'm trying to come down to his level. I'm not defending my price. I'm not trying to push him into a situation. I'm just asking a question so that I can build context for where to go next. Now, I need to highlight this. I am making up a situation on the spot in this video right now. I do not have a script for the things that I'm saying right now. I am teaching you guys principles, not memorizing scripts for a sales conversation, okay? And the principle that I would say that I'm trying to highlight here with what just happened is if you are unsure about where to go in a conversation because there are objections happening, you can reliably fall back on asking sincere and good questions that allow the customer to give you context for their situation. I should probably repeat that. You can always reliably fall back on asking questions that allow the customer to give you more context to their situation or to what they want. So if he reacts to that price, I get to say, oh, hey, yeah, will you give me a little bit more context about like your previous detailing arrangement? So let's just pretend that he says something like, yeah, I mean, he didn't charge anywhere near $125. It was more like $50 for a once a month detail. And it was like certainly more than what I needed. Okay, great. So like the information that I just got from him, and I call this hearing past what people say. So, for example, I'm married, okay? So this is an analogy that I'm giving you guys. But if my wife, comes home and she's like, are you serious? Like, you didn't do the dishes, you didn't do the trash, you didn't do any of this stuff. And it's like, the reality is maybe I did some of it, but I didn't have time to get to all of it, right? But like, she's really upset about it. I can hear past that and say, okay, what's really going on here? Like, sounds like something else happened today. It sounds like maybe like somebody got frustrated with her or she got frustrated with somebody else, and that's probably coming out a little bit in this situation, right? Because it might be like a disproportionate reaction, okay? We can do that with customers, okay? Right? We can hear past what they're saying. So what he just said was, well, he didn't charge anywhere near $125, and like for $50 a month, like I got exactly what I wanted. In some sense, if I hear past that, there's a few things happening. Number one, he had a price anchor in his head already, and it was $50. So the fact that I came with $125, which was more than double what he was assuming it would be, all of a sudden that reaction is not necessarily that he doesn't want my service. It doesn't mean he doesn't want his car detailed. What it means is there's this stepping down that I'm going to have to do because of a price anchor he had. It has nothing to do, I can't take it personally. And this is a really good lesson to learn. Like, if I'm hearing past what Mike is saying, it's not personal to me. It doesn't mean that he wouldn't value and wouldn't pay for my service, for example, if he knew what it was. It just means there's a price anchor he had previously, and there's this expectation gap that I'm now having to step into to try to reconcile, okay? So the next question I might ask Mike is, oh, got it. When you say that you got everything you needed, can you give me any more details about what that detailer did so that I know a little bit more about what you're expecting? And then Mike might say something like, and again, that's a good example of me falling back on a sincere question where I'm getting more context from the customer about his reaction. Okay? It's not a memorized script. I'm just asking questions. And Mike might say something like, yeah, I mean, he just did an interior wipe down. He vacuumed things up. He, got some stains out every now and then if I needed to. And then he just kind of like wash and wax the outside. It was, shiny. And it was a little bit better than going to the car wash that I was used to. And I didn't want to keep going to the car wash because my friends told me that it scratched up my paint. Boom. Okay. I have like all of the information I need right now. Okay. And this is what I would have assumed would happen with a guy like Mike and his reactions anyways. But what I'm learning now is, he's not concerned about the details. He's concerned about a quick wash and wax wipe down that probably takes around 45 minutes. Okay. So now what I get to do is help Mike make a decision. And this is kind of what I think a lot of people struggle with in terms of, talking to people on the phone is my job as the detailer is to help Mike get the context he needs and then make a decision based on what he wants. It's not to try to sucker him into what I think he should have. So most detailers, when they're in this situation, they default into this mode of, well, that's not detailing. That's glorified car washing. I'm a detailer. Here's what I do. Here's how valuable it is. And you put this like ego war onto the customer and you're like, I'm a detailer and here's what it's worth and da. I don't look at my business that way at all. I look at my detailing business as a way to serve the customer. So I'm pulling my ego out of it completely because I'm like, I don't really care if he thinks I'm a detailer. I don't really care if he wants the details. I care about what my business is designed to do, which is serve him for what he wants and help empower him to make a decision about what he needs for his car. So here's where I'm going to go in this conversation now, that he says, well, it was just a $50 wipe down. It was shiny when he was done, and it was more than enough. I'm going to illustrate these two paths. Mike, here's what it sounds like you're describing. 45-minute to an hour detail where you get all the main areas of the car done, some simple vacuum, and really you're just concerned about some very straightforward maintenance that keeps your car from getting too dirty over time. And when you ask me about what we charge, we generally default to giving the price for a full detail, which includes things like, and I'm going to list 1 to 2 to 3 more detailed aspects of something like this, like door jams, enzyme treatment, potentially extraction on upholstery if it's needed. And Mike, it sounds like that's actually not what you're trying to do, and your car doesn't require that. You're just looking for X, Y, and Z. Is that correct? And so I illustrate these two, I juxtapose these two things. Here's what you're describing, and then here's what we generally do, which is why I quoted you for that. Is what I'm describing, or how I'm hearing you, of what you want, is that correct? And then what happens is Mike gets to see kind of in this like full context of what he's expecting or what he's saying he wants versus what is available. And then he gets to make the decision, oh yeah, Luke, that is all I want. Or he can say something like, oh, well, some of those things you described are things that I would like to get detailed. And those things may not have been what this previous guy did, but certainly I think those are important things. And it allows us to go into this more nuanced conversation. And it's taken this long for us to get to the more nuanced conversation of like, Mike, what is it that you want? Let me help you illustrate what you're saying. Let me help illustrate what is available. And then let's come to this like middle ground of what you need and what I need to get the job done. Okay? And so at this point in the conversation, generally speaking, the customer is not used to a detailer being able to walk them through a decision like this, or even repeat back to them in kind of this articulated fashion of what they're saying that they want. And all of this builds a ton of trust between you and the customer, even in a small 3 to 4 minute conversation. Obviously, I'm talking a lot longer about this, but everything that we've said so far, we'd probably be in a 3-minute conversation total. So we're at this point now where I'm able to articulate in like this non-threatening, non-defensive way the difference between what Mike is describing he wants and detailing. But you see how if I would have done that in the beginning, it would have been out of this like defensive kind of ego place of like, well, that's not detailing. What you're asking for is this, that, and the other, and this is what we do. It's like now I'm in a position where I'm teed up to be like, oh, Mike, that totally makes sense. Thank you for giving me that context. Here's what it sounds to me like you're describing. And then based on what you were asking in the beginning of the conversation in terms of a quote, here's what I was describing. Let's talk about really what you think you need, and maybe even get some pictures of your vehicle to see what the potential is here. And then maybe talk about what it would look like on a recurring basis going from here on out after the first detail is done, because it sounds like that's also important to you. And now I'm able to open up all these can of worms in these really, really easy, sort of segued, teed up ways. Now, the conversation can go a lot of different ways from this point, but I think the most common direction conversations like this tend to go, if you're doing it skillfully, is we can now get into a conversation of what it looks like for Mike to kind of tailor the detail that he wants, and for me to explain to him what it's going to take for us to get there. So it's important to understand that 10% of people are always going to complain and they're never going to purchase from you, and that just is what it is. And you don't worry about that 10%. And then 10%, maybe even 20% or 25% are pretty much always going to buy. Like they'll always become a customer. And it's kind of the rest, like the 60 to 70%, really, 60 to 75% that we're concerned about, okay, that we kind of have to overcome some things with. And so, yes, the conversation could just get shut down and Mike is just kind of a jerk and he's like, I don't want to talk to you anymore, okay? But the more common instance here is once we've overcome or at least opened up the conversation to go further than just price and just, hey, this is more expensive than what I'm used to, and we can get more nuanced, well, now we can go into detail about, hey, what exactly are you looking for? Why are you looking for that? Like, here's what generally we do. Here's generally why we do it. Here's the prices we charge for what the baseline of our packages are, because here's the type of detail we're getting into. If you're not interested in that, there is certainly a lower threshold we can come to. But let's have that conversation now. Now that I know, like, oh, you don't care about X, Y, and Z. You don't care about 25% of this. Great. Okay, that makes so much sense. Here's a threshold we can come down to. And maybe even, Mike, what we could do is, listen, we can bring the first detail down to something really simple and say that we're just going to keep it at that 125 and it's going to be even more detailed than what you're used to. And then you and I can actually in person evaluate pre and post that detail if that was really worth it to you, and I can highlight the areas that you seem to be less interested in that I think will require far less maintenance over time, and we can figure out what the threshold is for you to have that monthly detail you're looking for at a price that makes sense for you. And maybe I can, as a detailer who's been doing this for a long time, give you a little bit more context of the things that I suggest and the prices associated with that and why, but make it really specific for you. Rather than you just having, kind of maybe what your other detailer did, which is just show up, do a $50 detail, and you really don't know what's being protected, what's not being protected, what's going to be, held up long-term, what's not going to be held up long-term, and potentially even him doing things that might damage things long-term, cleaning the headliner too much, spraying stuff on your navigation screen, and maybe we can just go at this together. And it just becomes far more collaborative that way. So even if Mike says, no, that's not what I want, what you can at least do as the detailer is have the satisfaction of knowing, okay, great, Mike isn't my customer. Like when I speak to somebody that way, they still get off the phone, they're just like, I'm done. I don't want this. It's like, perfect. Thank you, because I put up every filter I could possibly put up, and you're just still done. It's like, great, we don't need to work together. That's what that means. And again, guys, that's like the 10% of people. It's rare that actually happens. But really what I wanted to highlight here is just how to overcome those initial mountains in the conversation, which are always going to be there. They're so common. If you just know how to segue into some other things pretty quickly, it makes the conversation go to a far deeper place far quicker. And you might even help the customer recognize things about themselves or about what they want that they didn't know going into the conversation, right? Like guys like Mike often say things like, oh yeah, no, I love that. Like they love the idea of oh, this guy's going to kind of walk me through the detail that he's doing. He's going to walk me through my car. He's going to make me more knowledgeable in the future if I talk to another detailer about how I can get what I want. It's like I'm giving Mike back the power. And in many ways, like great selling on the phone in the detailing world happens when you, in very subtle ways as the detailer, just give the customer back their power to make decisions. And a lot of that is done just by giving them some very simple pieces of information. And by doing that, in some sense, by default, building some trust with them. It's very, very straightforward stuff. So guys, hit the like button if this was helpful for you and if you're a detailer who benefits from hearing things like this. And as always, guys, from Luke here at Wilson Auto Detailing, remember, a great detailer is always learning. And I'll see you guys in the next video.